their disposal of tires. And then once they have the amnesty event and it's over, the county will transport the tires to wherever processing facility they need to go to, and then DEP will reimburse whatever fees that they have accrued. We do not pay for, I'm sorry, we don't pay for, what is that word? Advertisements. We don't pay for employee fees. It has to be paid for the county by itself. This is one of the best programs we have. So far this year, I have over 16 counties in the state of Florida. That's one of the highest number that we've had for a while. I'm extremely proud of this program. I think I'm a little quick on time, but that's pretty much all my slides are. I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Yeah. Testing. Yeah, I'm on. By the way, I'm Ray Moreau with SWIX, and our next speaker is Terry Gray, president of TAG Resource Recovery. Hand it over to Terry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this workshop. I'm looking forward to our discussions this morning. Please go to the next slide. Murphy is alive and well. Would you go to the next slide, please? There we go. This morning, we're going to talk about Florida's scrap tire management program. We're going to talk about its creation, its evolution, and its current status. But before we do so, we're going to go back to the beginning, even before that. Next slide, please. So in the beginning, I started to work with scrap tires in 1984. Fortunately, I was only 12 when at that time. I became one of, no, please go back. No, you're going forward. Please go back. You're going to give my whole presentation. Okay. Please go forward one slide. That's it. So in 1984, I was one of the initial officers of the first large-scale tire processing operation in North America. And we shredded tires and converted them into tire-derived fuel, and we developed the first markets for tire-derived fuel in paper mills and cement plants in the US. But at that time, what we didn't have was there were no scrap tire management programs. There were no scrap tire management processors besides us, and there were no significant scrap tire markets or applications. Less than 1% of the tires were constructively utilized. You could only have so many tire swings or driveway borders, painted driveway borders tires. What we did have was growing stockpiles, both in terms of quantities and size. We had massive stockpile fires that would make the nightly news. And we had major environmental damage and remediation costs resulting from that. Next slide, please. So when we had the fires, that prompted Minnesota to develop the first scrap tire management program, and they banned scrap tires from disposal in stockpiles. Smart move on Minnesota's part. But what happened then is Minnesota's tires were transported across the border into Wisconsin, neighboring Wisconsin, into massive stockpiles that then had fires. So Wisconsin then banned stockpiles. And I think you're getting a feeling for the gradual progression. Everybody basically had to initiate waste tire management programs in self-defense. Next slide, please. These scrap tire fires can be really dramatic. They are fierce things. I've been involved in fighting scrap tire fires from Texas to California to Georgia to Nova Scotia, even to Austria. And the force and the power of these fires, especially in the initial stage, never ceases to amaze me. One fire in Alexandria, Virginia, one of the early ones, due to atmospheric conditions, actually had the plume go all the way up 20,000 feet and then spread. It looked like an atomic bomb. And I wish I had a picture of that, but this is a fire involving about 1 million tires in Fort Heights, Illinois. Next slide, please. This doesn't look like much. This is a canyon in California, but that fire that you're looking at has been going for almost 2 months, or had been going at the time of this picture almost 2 months. Some of the piles can revert to pyrolytic conditions and continue to generate oil and gases for up to 2 years. Next slide, please. So that led to Florida developing a program. And they started in 1987, and they didn't jump and just try to do something quickly. They carefully evaluated objectives, components, and experience, good and bad, of others. And it was during that gathering that Jan Clark contacted me because we had experience in waste recovery, and we saw what some other states were doing as well, and we could give her a feeling for what impact it would have on processors and being able to encourage them. So I had a number of conversations with Jan. She was part of a group that was led by Bill Hinckley, who was really a visionary, with Fletch Harold and Jan, and they developed a comprehensive program, not just an immediate thing, but a comprehensive program to correct the current problems, prevent reoccurrence, and provide a framework to encourage constructive utilization of the resources. That program was enacted in 1989, and it rapidly became one of the best programs in the country. Next slide, please. So in 1989, when it was enacted, I was beginning to think of what I wanted to do in the second stage of my life after waste recovery. We had built multiple plants. We had been through started as a sub-S corporation. We had built multiple plants. We'd gone through bridge capital with Goodyear investing in us and a major bank investing, and we'd gone public, and the excitement was kind of ebbing. So I was thinking about what I was going to do in the next stage of my life, and I got a call from Jan Clark saying, the legislature just approved our rule. We have a lot to do, and we need help. And would you be willing to help us? And I thought that might be a good thing to do while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So the first thing that Florida so I've worked with Florida ever since then, 1989, under a series of task assignment contracts. Would you go back, please? So the first thing that Florida had to do was deal with the stockpiles. They had to identify, quantify, prioritize, qualify contractors, stabilize sites, and abate them. And in the initial set of sites that we found, there were 40 of them, and they were believed to represent over 10 million tires. So it was a real task to get real quantity estimates. For instance, the largest of them, the Polk County site, had historically been estimated at 4 million. And when I got into looking at it more closely, we found that it was only 2 million, and Jan kept arguing with me about that. But I'm very proud of the fact that when it was abated, it was 1.96 million. And I wish I'd been that accurate on all of them. But anyway, a major task was dealing with the stockpiles, going through a very well thought out process to stabilize and abate them. Please go forward. Some unique things in Florida's program. They really were visionary on the part of Jan and Bill Hinckley and others that came up with this. Florida identified the responsible parties, specifically the landowners, and we explained cost recovery measures if the state abated the site, And as a result, many of the sites were abated by the landowners without public fund expenditure. That's a really unique thing that Florida did. The second thing is the state agreed to pay a premium for cleanup proposals that constructively utilized the tires, but they had to not displace ongoing generation from the existing limited markets. We didn't want to put stockpile tires into the markets and have the tires that would have gone there go into more stockpiles. It would have been counterproductive. So that provision of paying a premium, excuse me, for the constructive utilization of the tires was a great incentive for developing new markets. The state also involved all levels of government in the identification and implementation of the process. It provided financial support to the counties and cities when needed. And they conducted amnesty programs in counties with medical alerts. And at the time, we were dealing with West Nile and Eastern equine encephalitis diseases that killed a number of people. Next slide, please. This is the Polk site that I mentioned earlier, and you see a bunch of small piles, but if you look to the right of this, you see larger piles, and the whole pile was originally over in that area, and we created fire lanes between these segments. When I say stabilized a pile, it was all one great big pile, and so if it caught fire, the fire would run over the surface of it, involve the whole site, and then lady bar the door. And this site was particularly problematic because it sat right on sandy soil right above a major aquifer recharge zone. And if the fire created pyrolytic oils that went down through the sand and into that aquifer, the impact on Florida would be substantial, could be substantial. Next slide, please. So big piles, little piles, spread all over the place. Next slide, please. And even unique piles, the Osborne Reef, where tires were dumped in there to become an artificial reef. People didn't think it all the way through. They didn't realize that the tires, although they looked heavy, were only 10% heavier than water. And as a result, the tires became mobile and started to move in storms and impact the reef. And we initiated an effort to abate these that we'll go into a little bit later. Next slide, please. So the stockpile results. As I mentioned, initially we identified about 40 stockpiles containing about 10 million tires. Others were added later. To date, about 99, I wanted to round it off to 100, but I can only find 99 stockpiles containing about 16 million tires have been abated. But the interesting thing, it's great that that's been done, but almost 60 of the sites, 60%, containing about 10 million of the 16 million tires were abated by the responsible party without state expenditure, without using public resources. By far the best of any state program. And as best I can tell from information provided to me by DEP, it looks like there are less than an estimated 100,000 tires remaining in stockpiles, and the sites are small, being less than 30,000 tires. And that's a fluid number because additional stockpiles form, especially if enforcement is compromised for financial or political reasons. And the last 5-6 years have been tough for everybody with COVID and some of the financial constraints. Next slide, please. So the next thing that Florida had to do was you had to deal with the stockpiles, then you had to manage ongoing generations so that you didn't create more stockpiles. And Hope dealt with some of these things, but I'll just go through them quickly. Critical parts were to register or permit all segments of the tire handling chain, from tire stores to haulers to processors to disposal sites. Established operating parameters and monitored conformance, a continuing battle. And the important part was they enforced violation penalties. Some people even went to jail. And equipment was seized. The whole rule was tied to the litter control rule that had the provisions in it allowing seizure of equipment. So It's one thing for a person hauling tires in their pickup to dump them when they might get their wrist slapped, but if somebody was going to take away their truck, that got their attention. The objective was to minimize stockpiles by increasing the probability of being caught with good oversight and having penalties greater than the savings that the person would achieve by violating the law. Florida has a good history, but budget and experienced manpower limitations can be a challenge. Next slide, please. Florida did some things in its initial program development that were really wise. One of them was they required tires to be cut into at least 8 roughly equal pieces or shredded prior to landfill disposal. Now that reduced the volume and it improved landfill space utilization, but a side effect of it was that it increased the cost associated with disposal and made it more appropriate, decreased the driving force or increase the driving force to create markets. Florida also used grants to counties. At the beginning, they gave grants to all counties, large and small. It's evolved now into only going to small counties. But they were used to promote applications like playground cover and product purchases. And they even set up a mechanism so that the state reviewed some of these products, approved them, and made them easier for the county to purchase. There were a lot of phantoms out there and scams. Florida recognized that markets had to be diverse, and it developed a strategy to encourage these multiple markets. They've had an outstanding success rate, but markets change constantly and require continuing development. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these market segments briefly, and in following sessions, you'll hear more about it from the panels. So I'm only going to go very quick. TDF for years was the largest market. It's the market we worked to develop in waste recovery because it was large and didn't require particularly sophisticated processing, at least compared to chrome rubber and some of the others. And TDF offers environmental and operational advantages versus coal, including lower greenhouse gas generation, and it has a renewable resource component from the natural rubber that's in it. And there's less landfill usage because it has a lower ash content than most coal. So that's the end of the ad for TDF, but it is a very good fuel. It's not a forced fit. So major usage in Florida includes multiple cement kilns. Their usage depends on market and operating conditions. As John mentioned earlier, sometimes when the business climate is strong and construction is strong, they optimize production, and that requires them to just focus. They want to simplify things, and they simplify their fuel mix as part of that. There are multiple resource recovery facilities that use TDF to maintain optimum combustion conditions when they're generating electricity, especially during wet periods. So these large mass burn units can get damp, and it can make it very difficult to maintain temperatures and maintain good combustion. So utilizing tire-derived fuel is like an octane booster with 3 times the amount of energy per pound, and it helps them maintain good combustion. And Florida was lucky enough to have a large renewable energy facility, the Wheelabrator Ridge facility, come in at the very early stage of the pile abatements, and it provided a market for many of the tires that were taken from the stockpiles. The initial developers were looking at a number of states, and we got involved in talking with them, and they ended up choosing Florida, and that was a real benefit. And then that facility was bought from the developers by Wheelabrator Ridge. It used, for many years, it used several million tires a year to help generate power for Florida homes. Changing economic factors forced its closure several years ago, and it was a real loss, had a real negative market impact. Many of those tires are now just shredded and landfilled. So the TDF volumes vary with market conditions, and total usage has declined significantly because of Wheeler-Brader Ridge and some declined usage in the other market segments, but it remains an important application. Next slide, please. Rubber modified asphalt is a term that if you've worked with scrap tires at all, it's been heralded as what was going to use all of the tires, going all the way back to ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, which was going to require the use of rubber in all highways in the whole world, or at least in the United States. But Florida has used more rubber modified asphalt than any other state except California and possibly Arizona. It pioneered terminal blending along with Mike Rouse and some really good people in Florida DOT. They developed this technology that has since been broadly used across the country. Florida DOT is the only state to specify rubber modified asphalt in all high traffic road maintenance for many years. At its peak, RMA consumed about 10% of the waste tires generated in Florida. However, block polymers, styrene block polymers, primary products produced by major companies, have come in and they have displaced rubber modified asphalt in Florida. So there's virtually no usage. However, there's some new technology, some dry process technology, two variations of it that are now being demonstrated around the country, and they have the chance of rejuvenating this market by offering lower price and similar performance, and be able to compete effectively against the block polymers. Next slide, please. Ground rubber. Florida is lucky to have multiple producers of high-valued ground rubber products. They've grown significantly while other markets have declined. Colored mulch especially has become a major growth market. Ground rubber for synthetic sports fields, molded rubber products, and colored mulch, they've all continued to grow. They are probably, they have grown in the face of other markets that are declining. Next slide, please. Civil engineering applications are kind of an enigma. Florida pioneered some of the early usages in landfills. They've had very substantial usage in those in leachate drainage layers, gas collection channels, and daily cover, and some of this continues. DEP and Department of Health jointly evaluated improved uses of chips in septic drain fields. It developed rapidly into a market using as much as 2 million a year. And then somebody came along with a mechanical device that's displaced all aggregate usage across most of the country. So civil engineering markets use limited quantities in Florida and the US, but new applications, some really creative applications are being demonstrated that could be applicable in Florida. Next slide, please. So just for overall perspective, Florida's scrap tire management program has been and continues to be fundamentally sound. It has multiple major producers and a broad market base. We're doing a detailed market analysis now, and the preliminary data should suggest that overall usage level has declined significantly from about 93% 5 years ago to about 70% now, or in 2022. But it's still comparable to the national average that John discussed earlier. One critical point is that no market development has been done in Florida for over 5 years. And depending on final results of the market analysis, it may be appropriate to look at consider future market development efforts to increase the usage of this valuable resource. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I thank you for your time. I think we're on schedule.